Today, let's talk about a document that is fundamentally reshaping Canada, the 94 Calls to Action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, this isn't just another government report. You can think of it as a roadmap for the future, and understanding it is pretty crucial for everyone who calls this place home.
Right from the very beginning, the report lays out its purpose with this really powerful statement. It's all about two things: redressing the legacy, which means actively working to correct the deep, ongoing harms caused by the residential school system, and advancing reconciliation. It's a call to action, not just reflection.
And that's really the big question, isn't it? This report isn't just for politicians or big institutions. It's a roadmap that outlines responsibilities for every single person in Canada, whether your family has been here for generations or you're a newcomer. So what does it actually ask of us?
To really get the calls, you have to start with the why. See, these aren't just recommendations pulled out of thin air. They came from years and years of work by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which listened to the courageous and often absolutely heartbreaking stories of thousands of survivors of Canada's residential school system. So every single call is a direct response to those truths.
The first set of calls, well, they dive right into the most immediate and painful legacies of the residential school system, and they start with the welfare of children and families.
And this is how a historical injustice is still playing out today. The whole point of residential schools was to separate children from their families, from their culture. And today, Indigenous children are still taken from their homes at a staggering rate. It's a direct and devastating echo of that past.
So the very first call to action tackles this head-on, and it's not some vague wish. It lays out really concrete steps. It calls for more resources to keep families together, for mandatory training for social workers on this specific history, and for focusing on keeping kids connected to their culture. It's all about stopping the cycle by actually understanding where it comes from.
But the report makes a really crucial point here. You know, healing individuals isn't enough if the systems themselves are still broken. The very structures of Canadian society, our courts, our schools, our hospitals, they all need to be reformed.
And this is a big one. Call to action number 43 is kind of the bedrock for the whole thing. It calls on every level of government to adopt and implement UNDRIP, that's the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. You can think of it as the international gold standard for human rights. And the report says it has to be the guiding framework for everything we do on reconciliation in Canada.
And when you look at some of the other calls, you really get a sense of just how wide-ranging this is. I mean, we're just looking at a few here, but they demand change everywhere. In the justice system, to end the shocking overrepresentation of Indigenous people in prison, in our schools, to make sure every single student in Canada learns this history, and in healthcare, to close the unacceptable gaps in care that still exist today.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting, because the calls move beyond just government and institutions, and they land right on our doorstep. The message here is crystal clear. Reconciliation is not a spectator sport. I mean, just look at this. It's not just for politicians. Corporate Canada is called on to respect Indigenous rights and create opportunities. The media is asked to tell more Indigenous stories from Indigenous perspectives. Even our national sports leagues are called on to be more inclusive. And of course, the churches that ran many of these schools have a specific duty to teach their own members about that history. The message is everyone has a role.
This brings us to something that's so important, especially for anyone new to Canada. For way too long, the citizenship process, well, it taught an incomplete version of Canadian history. Call to action number 93 is all about fixing that, making sure that from day one, newcomers learn about the foundational role of treaties and the tough history of residential schools.
And then there's this. It's such a simple change to the oath of citizenship, but it's incredibly profound. By adding the words including treaties with Indigenous peoples, the whole oath is transformed. It makes it clear that treaties are not just historical documents. They are a fundamental part of Canada's laws. It says that becoming a Canadian means honoring that relationship.
So, after laying out all 94 of these specific actions, where does that leave us? What's the real end goal here?
Well, the Commission is clear. Reconciliation isn't a finish line you cross. It's not a box you can just tick and say, we're done. It's an ongoing process. It's about the day-in, day-out work of building and, just as importantly, maintaining respectful relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. It's work that never really ends.
And that brings us right back to the central question. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission has given all of us a detailed roadmap. It points the way to a better, more just future. But a map doesn't do any good if it just sits on a shelf. So the final question really is for all of us, who is responsible for walking this path? The answer, of course, is everyone.